quite a few out recently. Sorry, kitty cat wants to come play. This is one that I threw together quickly. Took it to my local gaming store for standard night. I haven't played standard since 2001 when it was called Type 2. So figured I'd go over the deck tech. I tied for first place, like I said, and this is what I ran. We'll go over the main deck and the sideboard. These are just extra sleeves here in case I broke one. Found these gorgeous sleeves at Walmart, of all places. So I think I have this broke back down the way it needed to be. This is the sideboard. We'll get into it here in a second. But this is what I built was a mono blue tempo control deck, or what I tried to build. It seemed to work most of the time. I got mana screwed a couple times, mana hosed once, but other than that, it ran really well. So we'll go into the creatures first, then we'll go into I believe, the counter magic. Let me look here real quick. The counter magic, and then into card draw, and then into a little bit of protection for our creatures, because we can't have them dying all the time. So, and then of course the land base, because you'll see a Castle of Antris down there. So the first thing we ran was, and I hope the glare isn't too bad, a full playset of Spectral Sailors. This is also card draw, but it's one of our creatures. We can flash it in for 1 blue. So we ran a full playset of this. It's a 1/1 flyer. There's a lot of, I think everything in here is flying except for 4 creatures. So that gets into one of our card draw spells in a bit. But we're running Spectral Sailor, flash it in for a Defender. I was playing a Knight's deck, and they were playing the 2/1 Knight that puts a +1/+1 counter on another Knight when it dies. They didn't have any other Knights. They didn't expect me to flash this in. They, of course, changed their gameplay on the second match. But first match, I got a free kill with just sacrificing this little guy. It wasn't a big deal. So a full playset of those. We are also running to flash in, and since we're doing most things on our opponent's turns and not doing much on our own, we're running a full set of Brineborn Cutthroat. This guy can get out of hand really quick. He can start, drop him on your opponent's turn too, and he can start getting out of control quick because it's +1/+1 counters. So whenever you cast a spell, that includes flashing in things like the Spectral Sailor. On your opponent's turn, put a +1/+1 counter on it. So this got more than 1 kill. A control aspect / flash aspect that we ran. Let's see if I can fan these guys out here. And the reason I built this deck, it's not optimized, but these were the cards that I happened to have sitting around that I could throw together to go play standard. I ended up getting lucky. I got three Brazen Borrowers. I know this is one of the more expensive cards in Throne of Eldraine now. I know that they were sitting around about $10 for a long time. Now I think they're like 30. But it's a control aspect for the petty theft portion of it to return target non-land permanent to an opponent's that an opponent controls to their owner's hand. So a great control tempo aspect there. But then also it has flash, which goes back to the Brineborn Cutthroats, and flying, and it's a 3/1. So it can start, if you keep it alive, it can start attacking in for quite a bit of damage. And then since we are running so many instance and counter spells and stuff, we are running a full playset of Terramander. So this one's a 1 blue drop, great to come down on turn 1. It's 7 and a blue to adapt it 4, which would make it a 5/5 flyer. But that 8 mana is reduced by 1 for every instant and sorcery card in your graveyard. So your graveyard fills up pretty quick. Typically, when you get to mid-game and you need something bigger, he scales with your game. So he becomes a mid-game threat as well as an early game, just chipping away for damage. I happen to have 4 of those guys. And something that you typically don't see in probably a tempo control deck like this, and I pulled 2. I actually have 4 of these, but 2 are alternate arts, so I just use the regular arts. Is 2 copies of Fae of Wishes. This allows me to dig into my. First off, if you're playing an aggro match, the 1/4 for 2 creates a great body to be able to block an aggro match. It'll block a lot of the 3/3 knights. It'll block the 2/1 knights. If you run up against an aggro match, just dropping this for a 1/4 body stops that. And it is a flyer as well. But in the mid game, it allows you to scale and get into your sideboard, and you'll see that my sideboard is all non-creatures. So it allows me to go pull in my sideboard, and there are a couple things in my sideboard against different matchups, besides just some extra counter spells, that are great. So I'm actually running 2 of these, and not something you'd probably typically see, but it worked well in my case. I'll give you an example. I am running in the sideboard. I'll go ahead and pull it up. A card called Selective Snare. And Nissa, Who Shakes the World, is pretty prevalent, at least from what I've seen. And this card was great for taking out Nissa because it set them back tempo-wise by a lot. So Nissa changes their lands into 3/3 elemental creatures. All grand. This allows you to return X target creatures of a creature type of their choice to their owner's hand. So you simply pick elementals, you tap in blue plus however much you can, and you pop all their lands back to their hands too, because they are creatures and lands, and they're elemental subtype. So you could just bounce all of their lands right back to their hand. It also worked against Knight decks as well. Those were the 2 that I saw a lot of. Now we're going to get into the counter spells. So that's our creature suite. Our counter spells, we're running 2 Tails Ends. Tails Ends counter activated abilities, triggered abilities, and legendary spells. So this stops planeswalkers from plussing. It stops Embercleave, because that's a legendary spell, I believe. I think it's a legendary artifact. I may be wrong with that one. But it stops a legendary spell is also a planeswalker ultimating. So it stops a lot of different things that can happen. It was invaluable. And also it just allows it another thing in our graveyard. We are running 4 negates. This also takes care of planeswalkers. Any non-creature spell, it just counters target non-creature spell. We have the creature counter spells, the extra ones that we aren't main decking. They're in the sideboard to swap out negates for creature counter spells if we run into a creature matchup. But this takes care of more things, and probably what I would start with a main deck for game 1, and then change to what you need for game 2. And then to counter and dig a little deeper, especially towards mid-game, we are running a full playset of Sinister Sabotage. So it's just 2 blue and a colorless. The double blue doesn't matter for us because we're running a mono blue deck, but it's counter target spell and Surveil 1. Allows us to get, if we're mana flooded or anything, it allows us to start dumping some things in the graveyard. Or if we are really close to be able to adapt our Terramander, it could allow us to dump an extra instant or sorcery into our graveyard, and then just be able to adapt our Terramander and go in for the win. And then main decking our creature counter spells. We are running 2 Essence Captures. So it's counter target creature spell and put a +1/+1 counter on up to 1 target creature, which means you don't have to target if you don't want to. I made a play mistake not realizing that it was on up to 1 target creature you control, where I could have adapted my Terramander, but when you put a +1/+1 counter on it, you can't adapt your Terramander anymore. So I made a play mistake there in one of the earlier games. There are 2 more Essence Captures in the sideboard where you can substitute out 2 negates and put in 2 more Essence Captures if you're running up against a creature aggro deck. For card draw, besides us running the Spectral Sailors, the Sinister Sabotages allows us to card draw. Card selection. We are running 4 Winged Words. This one almost all the time will cost you a blue and a colorless at sorcery speed to draw 2 cards. So it's tap 2, draw 2. Great exchange rate. And with all the flyers we're running, I never cast this for 3. So a full play set of that. And then what deck wouldn't be complete for card draw also with a full play set of Opt? It's card selection and card draw. It's an instant. You can just start digging for what you need. And the last 2 cards in the main deck are a little bit of protection for our creatures. We are running 2 copies of Lazotep Plating. So it's just blue and a colorless in the sense you and permanent you control gain hexproof until end of turn. This came in handy a couple of times. Don't need any more than 2 in your deck. It also has a mass 1, which really isn't going to matter that much unless you need a blocker. So, yeah, that's just a little bit of creature protection and an extra creature. To make the main deck run, what are we running? We are running 2 Castle Vantress to be able to get some card selection. And since we're running so many islands, it's always going to come into play untapped, so it's basically an island for us as well. And then we are running 19 basic islands. Try to keep it as cheap as possible. Obviously, the most expensive part of this entire deck are the Brazen Borrowers now. Everything else in this deck is super cheap. Easy to build, and fun to play if you have the patience to run a tempo deck. And it can be pretty aggro with the Brineborn as well. Let me get these out of the way. Those cutthroats can really start packing on the damage. Now, in our sideboard, what are we running? We're running the Selective Snare. We've already talked about this. We're running 1 copy of it. So I've been playing around with Tron and Modern, building a Tron deck, and starting to understand the ability of going to your sideboard and picking something out versus taking something from your sideboard and putting it in your deck and hoping you draw it as an answer. Those 2 things are completely different. So Tron, this is where I put the Fae of Wishes in, because looking at the Tron and the power of being able to go to your sideboard and getting what you want has really changed my mindset on the sideboard. So most of the time, Selective Snare won't go into our main board. We'll want to go get it with Fae of Wishes. It gives us 2 chances versus 1 chance of just pulling this out. I did main deck it for a aggro Knights build that I played against and didn't end up pulling it. I did pull a Fae of Wishes and wished I would have just left this in my sideboard. The next card we're playing is Mass Manipulation. This is great if we get into the mid to later game to try to finish a match out. We're going to come get it with the Fae of Wishes. We're never going to put this in our main deck. Gain control of X target creatures and or planeswalkers means that we can come get it. Then we can steal all of their stuff and then simply just swing in for the win if we're in a board stalemate. For decks that want to play out of their graveyard or cast things from the top of their library, if they're playing it's not Aeon of Echoes, I don't think, and I wouldn't think they'd play that anyways, it's too slow. But we are running 1 Grafdigger's Cage in the sideboard, just in case we get into somebody who wants to deal with their graveyard or manipulate the top of their deck and play spells from it. We are running 1 Stolen by the Fae. This is a single targeted removal and nets us a bunch of flyers, hopefully. So return target creature with converted mana cost X to its owner's hands, and you get X/1/1 blue flying creature tokens. The only thing that would have made this better if it was return target permanent with converted mana cost X, non-land permanent, so it could hit planeswalkers. But other than that, it's a great little sideboard card. The only planeswalker I'm running is 1 copy of Mu Yang Ling. This one's good against aggro decks as well if you main board her in because of that -3 ability. You just have to plus her once and then you can minus her to create a 4/4 blue elemental creature token. I put this in here more for mirror matches, so that way as the game goes on and you guys are just countering each other's stuff and tempo playing, you can hope to crank out a couple extra 4/4 blue elemental birds to be able to finish out the game. And against aggro decks, if you need to, you can use that first ability, or if you're playing against Vantress Gargoyles or something like that, you can make them lose their ability to fly so you can fly over the top. This is the reason she's in here. I didn't end up playing her. For mirror matches, we are running Mystical Dispute. We are actually running in the sideboard 2 copies of Mystical Dispute because counterspell that's it costs 2 less if it's countering a blue spell. So it's 1 blue instant counter spell. This also works against the Royal Scions because they're red-blue, they're Izzet. So this is a great sideboard for those type decks, mirror matches, or for Izzet type decks that want to run the Royal Scions. But we're also playing Negate, which will take care of the Royal Scions as well. And as I said before, we are running the extra copies of Essence Capture. I need to keep my sideboard separate here so I can find it later. We are running the 2 extra copies of Essence Capture, so we can substitute out the negates for Essence Captures if we are up against a creature matchup instead of more non-creature stuff. I have 1 copy of Runaway Together. This is useful for returning a Brazen Borrower to our hand and returning a big threat of our opponents to their hands, and then we can reuse the Brazen Borrower's ability. So basically, if we pop Runaway Together against a Brazen Borrower, we'll get to bounce 2 creatures, because we'll get to bounce 1 with this, we'll get to bounce 1 when we play the Petty Theft portion of Brazen Borrowers. So it allows us to clear the field to be able to get in with some other items. This is also at instant speed. I was very tempted to main deck this to be able to use more with the Brazen Borrower, but I ended up just putting 1 in the sideboard in case I needed it. I did main sideboard this into the main board against the Knights build that I played against. We are running 2 copies of Aethergust. Choose target spell or permanent that's red or green. Its owner puts it on the top or bottom of their library. This is a tempo card. I used it against Royal Scions and tempoed them out. I also used it against Wicked Wolf and tempoed that out. It's just a tempo play that allows us to get across against red and green. And then also against creature-heavy decks, we are running 2 copies of Frogify. It's just enchanted creature loses all ability and is a blue frog, and it's 1/1. I did use this against the person who was playing Nissa as well, because it just turned their land that they turned into a creature. It lost its land status and just turned into a 1/1 frog. If I understood the ruling correctly and the way we played it, we didn't ask for a judge. We just both agreed that if it enchanted the elemental creature, it would lose all of its abilities, including being a land, and then it would become a 1/1 blue frog. So, and last but not least, if we're playing something where they try to put their eggs in 1 basket, we are running 1 copy of Charmed Sleep. So, mono blue control. It was fun to play. I'll probably go back and play again. It was, I mean, for what it was, I enjoyed it. Like I said, I haven't played Standard in forever. There's a lot of things you could do with this to try to optimize it better. Obviously, 1 more copy of Brazen Borrower would be wonderful because that's one of the best tempo cards in here. And you could probably get the Fae of Wishes out. I just liked having that option of being able to get into my sideboard,